Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to our conservation conversation today. My name is Heather Balker. I am the state coordinator for an initiative called Women for the Land. We are an initiative of several federal, state, and local conservation partners that work together here in Indiana to bring conservation practices and conservation information to you all. So I'm very pleased to see you all. Thank you again for coming. I'm going to now turn the presentation over to Jessica Outcalt. I'll introduce her very quickly. Jessica is an Ag and Natural Resources Extension educator for Purdue Extension. She's in Grant County, and she's previously worked with the Nature Conservancy and West Environmental Consulting as a consultant. She received her bachelor's degree in biology from Taylor University and has completed her PhD in wildlife ecology at Purdue. So she is a birding expert. So, Jessica, I'm turning it over to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Just as a disclaimer, trying to get my child to nap. She's being a little fussy, so hopefully I don't have to turn her over or take a break, but she should fall asleep here soon. So you all get to see her wonderful little face. So today I'm going to be talking about the project that I did with the Nature Conservancy, Forestry for the Birds. This is a collaborative project that we did with a whole bunch of different organizations and people, and in large part, the goal is forestry with the focus of protecting wildlife. So we wanted this to be collaborative and innovative for both landowners and foresters to be able to use. This was inspired by a similar project first started in Vermont. The Nature Conservancy really wanted to bring this to Indiana and the Central Hardwoods. So creating a program for Indiana forest landowners to manage their lands for birds. That link there takes you to the original project, kind of the inspiration for what we were working on. So in consultation with wildlife experts, ornithologists, foresters, we selected a list of 12 target bird species, which is what I'm going to talk primarily about today. And we really wanted to make this process of selecting these species a collaborative process to make sure that both foresters and wildlife biologists had their voices heard as part of this project. And then as part of the project, we've developed a pocket guide that's available now. It will literally fit in your pocket, and that kind of talks about forest management, targeting these 12 bird species. There's also a forester's guide. That one's still in progress. I just got back from maternity leave, so I'll admit I'm not sure what the status of the Forester's Guide is, but it is in progress. And then we've also written profiles of each of the species that are being published in the Indiana Woodland Steward. So I think 3 are out already, and the next 9 will be published subsequently in each issue. So these are the target species that we selected. We first narrowed the list of birds that breed in Indiana to forest birds whose populations are declining or are threatened in some way. And then after a lot of discussions with ornithologists, wildlife biologists, conservation agencies, we kind of narrowed that list down to some that maybe are a little more in need of targeted management. And then we sent a survey around to universities, Audubon societies, scientists, different groups of people, and asked them to kind of rank some species that met our criteria. We wanted birds for this project that were going to be charismatic or easily identifiable, birds that would respond well to forest management, and then birds that are in need of conservation. We really wanted this to be a accessible program for landowners, for you guys. So we wanted birds that are charismatic, that grab attention, that people would want to protect, if that makes sense. So we kind of broke this down into a few different forest guilds. So we have our mature forest specialists, the wood thrush, which is one of my favorite birds, cerulean warbler, worm-eating warbler, and hooded warbler. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these 4 birds. So the wood thrush, this is, like I said, one of my personal favorite species. This one is often a poster child for forest management. You can hear about wood thrush forest management protections in all kinds of contexts. There's a bird-friendly coffee that targets wood thrushes on their wintry grounds, for example. This also responds well to management for mature forest. So this is kind of a diagram of what a healthy mature forest might look like that a wood thrush would really benefit from. So we've got some of the understory shrubs. Usually these are native fruit-bearing shrubs that they depend on during migration. And then big tall tree species with an open forest understory. That really allows wood thrushes to forage, gives them space to display their breeding songs, things like that. Next bird is the cerulean warbler. Cerulean because it's bright blue, sky blue. This is listed on many conservation targeted species lists. It's an endangered species in Indiana. It's an important species in the central hardwoods region, and it responds well to management in mature forests. This one specifically really likes gaps in the canopy. So you can kind of see on this diagram, maybe there was this tree that was cut down or felled by lightning or something like that and creates this gap in the canopy. Cerulean warblers really respond well to that kind of forest structure. We have the worm-eating warbler. This is another conservation target in lots of contexts. This is one that is primarily in the southern half of Indiana. So if you're in the northern half of Indiana, you might not see these guys as much. But they really like these steep slopes. You can kind of see on this diagram, which is why they tend to hang out in southern Indiana mostly. And they are traditionally known as a mature forest bird, so big trees, open areas. But then during the post-fledging period, so after the young have left the nest and start to forage for themselves, they really like these kind of dense, almost clear-cut type habitats. So this young, early successional forest. This is something that we didn't really know until within the last 10 years or so. But yeah, some of these openings in a mature forest can be really beneficial for worm-eating warblers, especially. And then the last mature forest species is the hooded warbler. This one is another really beautiful species, a charismatic one. It's easily identifiable. A lot of the warblers can kind of mix together, especially during fall migration. The hooded warbler has this really distinct hood on the male that gives it its name. And it responds well to mature forest management. So their populations are stable right now, but they are vulnerable to what's called habitat fragmentation, where a large chunk of mature forest is broken up, whether that's through a road that goes through it or development or things like that. They really, they serve as indicators of a healthy forest. So that's one of the reasons we included them on this list is if you have hooded warblers, odds are you've got a really strong mature forest. And then the next guild of birds that we really wanted to focus on was early successional birds.
Jessica?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm going to hold most of the questions to the end, but we did have a question about the maps. I wanted to, or the profiles of the habitat. Are the blue highlighted spaces where the birds prefer to nest?
Yes, so that's a description of their nesting. Sorry, I skipped right over that. Yep, so hooded warblers nest in low shrubs on the ground. Worm-eating warblers are ground nesting birds, so that blue nest is on the ground, usually in the shelter of a shrub. Cerulean warblers nest in the canopy. Wood thrushes in mid-story trees, typically. So. All right, and then our young forest birds, so the early successional species, American woodcock, eastern whippoorwill. We have a pair of cuckoos, yellow-breasted chat, and eastern towhee. So I'll walk through these really fast. The American woodcock is, it's a game bird. It's actually hunted in a lot of places. Its populations are not declining because of hunting, but it's one that is often targeted for management because people want there to be woodcock populations. They have this really unique mating display where they display in these open areas, typically an old field, open prairie type opening in the woods, and they fly up hundreds of feet into the air and then spiral in this really amazing display. But then they nest in kind of dense shrubby areas in a young forest. Eastern whippoorwill, kind of a similar structure. Their song at night is one that's really popular and one that's easily recognizable and kind of a favorite among birds. So selected for that reason. Its populations are declining and it can respond well to management in young forest. You can kind of see this diagram with young trees, kind of this open area. They forage on flying insects, so they need these open spaces to be able to catch the food that they need. Yellow-billed cuckoo is one that we kind of targeted. The black-billed cuckoo is also threatened in Indiana, but the yellow-billed one is a little more common, so that's why we put this one on the list first, just because it's a little easier to see. So they tend to like riparian areas, so along creeks. So that's why I included this kind of water symbology in the diagram, but then dense shrubby areas, often along edges of forests. Young forest is a habitat type that's actually declining in Indiana. It's something that is not talked about much. Recent years, studies have kind of implied a need for this young forest, but this is why we really wanted to target a lot of young forest birds, because a lot of times when people hear forest management, they hear we need to protect these mature old growth forests. And that's true to an extent, but these young forests are also vitally important for a lot of birds, especially young birds that need protection from predators. These dense shrubby areas provide that protection, as well as food for a lot of migratory birds. Yellow-breasted chat is another one that really depends on these shrubby areas. This bird used to be classified as a warbler, but it's now in its own family. It's just kind of a unique little species. It likes to chatter, so that's what gives it its name. Again, these really dense shrubby areas, often old clear cuts that are regrowing, can be really good bird habitat. And then the eastern towhee, this one's actually a sparrow, but it's got this really bold, unique coloring. They nest on the ground and forage along the ground and leaf litter, but the males will select a tall tree that's kind of out in the middle of nowhere to display and sing to kind of mark their territory. So sometimes this can be an old snag, which I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes. But yeah, these kind of isolated tall trees, you'll often hear male towhees singing from. And then the last three birds on our list are kind of generalists or more snag dependent birds. So the Baltimore oriole, eastern screech owl, and the red-headed woodpecker. The Baltimore oriole, this one's a favorite. It often comes to bird feeders. It's one that everyone gets excited to see. It's got a beautiful song, beautiful coloring. We put them on the list because their population is declining quite a bit. And it's also, like I said, a really charismatic species. And it really likes this kind of open woodland habitat. So big isolated trees. I've seen them nesting in oak trees out in the middle of a agricultural landscape. But these big isolated trees can be really beneficial to kind of leave in place for orioles. And then they also depend on a lot of fruit-bearing shrubs for food during migration. They're fruit eaters primarily. So some of our native fruit species, serviceberry, dogwood, those kind of things. And then the eastern screech owl, we wanted to include a predator on the list as well. Its population is declining and it nests in dead wood. So either a big snag that's left over a dead limb on a large tree. All they really need is that tree with a cavity in it. So if you're doing forest management, leave a couple dead trees standing. You might get owls coming into your property. And then the red-headed woodpecker. This one's kind of our poster child for this project. It's a young forest bird. It's really beautiful. You often see it flying. You can see the black and white color block patterns on the wings. It's one of my favorite species. And it responds really well to snag management, so leaving these big open, big dead trees, and then young open forest. So kind of shrubby areas and open areas. It's a woodpecker, so it tends to forage on insects in dead wood, but it also can catch live flying insects. So kind of like the eastern whippoorwill, it needs open areas to fly around and catch insects. And then one question I get a lot is, why didn't you include this bird? What made you decide on this bird instead of this one? So these are kind of our honorable mentions. These are ones that we really wanted to include, but we wanted a nice tidy dozen birds just for simplicity. So the ruffed grouse is kind of one that we get asked about a lot. And ideally, we'd love if everyone could have ruffed grouse habitat in their forest, but their populations are really low in Indiana, so we didn't want to give people false hope, if that makes sense. So we picked the American woodcock over the ruffed grouse, kind of fit that game bird slot in our list, for lack of a better word. Some of these other birds occupy similar ecological niches. Ovenbird, scarlet tanager, for example, the blue-winged golden-winged warblers. Prairie and Kentucky warblers are primarily found in southern Indiana, so that makes it a little hard to recommend forest management techniques for a bird that isn't going to make it all the way to northern Indiana for one reason or another. So as part of this project, we've put together, like I said, some deliverables. So this link will take you to the kind of homepage for the project. And there you'll be able to find a packet guide, which is ready to download. It prints out pretty well. And then in that you'll find kind of, it's like a pocket, it's like a field guide for each of the birds that we have. It'll have pictures of the birds, fun facts about them, and then descriptions of their habitat, food choices, that kind of thing. We're working on the silvicultural guide, which will be targeted more towards professional foresters who are kind of making management plans for properties. And then we've also been writing profiles of each bird in the Woodland Steward. So this is kind of a screenshot of the first one. So it just kind of goes through the natural history, management strategies, kind of the biology of the bird. And this is being published in the Woodland Steward. So if you're not signed up for that, I'd recommend you do so. It's a great newsletter. Lots of really good information in it. And then while this is still rolling out and still kind of gaining traction, things you can do to manage your forests and your backyards for birds in the meantime. Keeping your domestic cat inside is one of the biggest things you can do to protect birds. Cats are actually the single largest source of mortality for birds in North America. So by keeping your cat inside, you're doing the best thing, both for your cat and for wildlife. If you have windows that tend to get a lot of bird collisions, you can get reflective stickers that'll kind of mitigate that and cut down on collisions. Turning off bright lights at night, outdoor, indoor lights, especially during migration periods, again, to help prevent window collisions or disorientation for migratory birds. Avoiding pesticides that can really damage, that can cut down on food sources for birds. A lot of our birds are insectivores. And then pesticides are also known to kind of directly harm birds as well. Planting native plants. So if you have the option, plant a native shrub instead of something like honeysuckle. Honeysuckle berries might look really nice and birds will eat them, but I use the example, it's like feeding cake to a toddler. It's just sugar. It's not a healthy food source. Native fruit-bearing shrubs are awesome options for people to plant because these fruits are rich in fats, which birds need to migrate. So like I said, serviceberry, dogwood. If you go to Indiana Native Plant Society, if you look that up, they've got lots of resources for native plants. And then bird-friendly coffee, even the coffee you drink can help birds. A lot of our birds will spend the winter in Central and South America, which is where a lot of our coffee is grown. Traditional coffee farms tend to just plant in a monoculture. They'll cut down the rainforests, plant coffee shrubs instead. But bird-friendly or shade-grown coffee will leave the forest canopy intact and plant coffee in the undergrowth. This provides food for both people and birds. So, another question I get asked a lot is, why are birds declining to begin with? Habitat loss is one of the big reasons. Climate change is another one, and then kind of the intersection of those. So as climate changes, more habitat is going to be lost. I mentioned domestic predators, building collisions, pesticide use, policy changes, and other factors. But that kind of sounds doom and gloom. But conservation really does work. Actions of single people really do add up, and they do make a difference. And there's so many stories of success, especially in the bird world. The Kirtland's warbler is one of my favorites. It's a bird that breeds up in northern Michigan. So if you're in Michigan, it breeds right up here. And this is a bird that was really declining. It was losing its habitat, but with good management, it's a fire-dependent young forest bird. So once prescribed fire started being introduced, its populations have rebounded, and now it's off the endangered species list. So conservation really does work. Another management technique that, even if you can't target, say, some of these species that we've gone through, invasive species management should really be part of management plans for your property. So this is a couple pictures of my property here. I'm in Tippecanoe County. We just bought a home with 4 acres of forest, and the forest hadn't been touched in decades, and it was overgrown with 8-foot-high honeysuckle. So as we've been slowly going through and removing that, lots of chainsawing, we've been able to kind of clear out some of the honeysuckle so we can actually see the forest floor now. And that's meant red-headed woodpeckers have moved back into our forest. I've been hearing wood thrushes sing at night in our forest. So even something as simple as going out and cutting down some honeysuckle can really make a difference in your forest patch. There's also some really good apps that are often helpful if you want to kind of start getting into birding, or kind of record the birds you see in your property. These are some of my favorites. So the Merlin Bird ID app is the single best bird app you can get. It's got options to help you identify what you're seeing. It's like Shazam for birds, so you can have it record a bird song and it'll tell you what bird's singing. There's also several bird guides, iNaturalist, lots of good apps out there to help you identify birds and see what's going on in your property. Cornell Lab of Ornithology puts together a free online field guide. So all about birds, you can just go in and search any bird you want, and it'll give you information on how to identify it, information about its biology, where you can see it, that kind of thing. And then there's options to get involved with science through citizen science projects. Project Feeder Watch is one that's really fun. I think there's a small fee, but they send you this poster of common feeder birds, and then you just record what birds you see at your bird feeder. It's a really good option to contribute to a scientific project. I think they use the data for kind of maps of where species are located, as well as population level information. So how a bird's population is doing. That's another one that would be fun to get involved in. additional sources and resources that I would often recommend. This project came out of the Nature Conservancy, so the Nature Conservancy has lots of good resources, articles, kind of thing. Purdue Extension, I'm biased because I'm an extension educator, but there's lots of good information about all kinds of management. Just contact your local extension agent and they'll be happy to help you with whatever questions you have about natural resources, agriculture, National Audubon Society, your local Audubon chapters, and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology for various information you might be looking for. With that, I can take any questions, and I've put my contact information as well as the cover of the pocket guide, so you guys can get a taste of what you're looking for.
Thank you, Jessica. That was great. And Ellie was very well behaved, sleepy girl.
Finally fell asleep.
Kristen asked about feral cats, and she says there seems to be so many communities that support feral cat populations over wild birds. For example, the practice of catching to neuter and then releasing them back. And is there anything that can be done about this? Because leash laws don't really seem to help or apply to cats. I don't think people think about their cats when they think about leash laws, but any thoughts about that?
Yeah, and that's a topic that can get really contentious really fast because people like their cats and they think, you know, it's a predator, it belongs outside, but they're actually not native to North America. So it's an introduced predator. So besides, you know, supporting your local shelter, adopting instead of, you know, breeding, getting your cat fixed, and then keeping your cat inside. That's what I would recommend without getting into political or contentious topics. So
it's really a public education effort, I think. But even then, there's no guarantee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, even the little actions we can do personally. I'm a cat person. I have one in my house, but we keep him inside and he's happier because of it. So
safer.
For sure.
Safer as well for them. So other questions from anyone? I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. I thank everybody for coming. Feel free to hang on just a few minutes if you'd like to have more casual conversation. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.